right, now those were excerpts from our conversation on the same subject on Monday, which was the kickoff of the 4th International Conference on Safe Schools Declaration. Of course, the conference was hosted by Nigeria, and it ended yesterday. So we have in the studios to discuss the outcome and other related issues. Two guests with us. First, let's welcome the Permanent Secretary of the Federal Ministry of Education, Architect Sonny Echono. Pleasure to have you with us this morning.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay. Also here with us in the studios is Mrs. Judith Giwa-Amo. She's Education Officer at UNICEF and also National Coordinator of Education in Emergencies Working Group. She was our guest on Monday. Pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Happy to be here. Good morning.
Okay. Well, let's begin the conversation with Architect Sonny Echono, who, of course, is the Permanent Secretary in the Federal Ministry of Education. You were a participant at the just concluded 4th International Conference. How did it go?
Fantastic. It went very well. As you recall, this is the 4th time the conference has been organized. And we had partners, 5 different partners, including the first 3 organizers. It all started in Oslo in Norway in 2015 when the Safe Schools Declaration was muted and agreed upon. And we have Argentina and Spain as other hosts in 2017 and 2019 respectively. They were joined by the African Union Commission as well as the Global Coalition to Protect Education to Attack. These were our principal partners, but we had everybody, because of the Global Coalition, we had all sorts of key actors in the United Nations space. We even had artists, David Beckham, people from CNN, and such other networks joining us to try and propagate this. And the attendance was fantastic. The outcome very, very enlightening. We had various experiences, some, if you like, not so good experiences. We spoke to children, victims of these attacks, and they gave us their experiences, and we were also able to share in their pain. There were some good stories, those who were able to move on and also complete their education and are doing things with themselves. So on the whole, we were able to share practices. We examined what happened here, particularly in the Sahel region, our sub-region, and the good practices that have been done in other countries that have had similar experiences from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and other parts of Africa, in Yemen, in Libya, and so on. So it was a good experience, and we hope going forward, just as the theme of the conference indicated, we will move from commitment to actual practice.
Pamsek, looking at this very conference held in Nigeria, this is the 4th, I believe, and of course, if I could just really go through and remember what one of the participants, Zamanef, I think, of the, full-blown participant, I believe he was saying there was something different about this Abuja conference, and then it's unlike the other 3 previously held in certain countries. How different was this conference, looking at you as somebody who has been at the center of it, and of course, the hosts?
Thank you. You see, Nigeria is more like the epicenter of the subject matter we were discussing. So we had the actual experience of it, from the first experience in all the various attacks that you are very familiar with. And even in the very recent past, we've had cases of school invasions, kidnappings. So we are talking about being at ground zero, as it were. Mm-hmm. Also, because we've also had some experience over time in dealing with what we call the Safe Schools Initiative. So we had a lot to share. First, the fact that at the height of the Boko Haram insurgency, we experimented with taking children from traumatized areas, from areas that are affected by these attacks, from Buniyadi, from Dapchi, from
Chibok.
Mm-hmm. And we took these children to, using our model, because we have our federal unity colleges, right, where we bring children from all parts of the country into specific locations to foster integration and national unity. We took some of these children and we took them to various schools across the country. Now that experience, we have both the positive and the negative. Many of them were able to finish their education and move on. But there are others that had traumatic problems. Others had difficulties or even being able to integrate with other students. There were issues about whether they were being well accepted by other students and so on and so forth. So these are things we were able to share, and we were able to see the issue of the psychosocial support, the training that we're now giving our teachers is also something that we were able to share with the rest of the world. We've been able to develop what we call guidelines for implementation. This was agreed upon, and at the last National Council on Education in Jalingo, in Taraba State, it was endorsed by all the states. So we've now moved, we have a framework now for implementation, and we are sharing this with all actors in the states, with our military. For example, Nigeria now has accepted the fact that we're not going to be using schools for military purposes, not as bases, not at even for landing helicopters or supplies, because that breeds its own. It makes schools now targets, and that has its own consequences. So we've also signed in on that, and we're doing a whole lot. So it was a very good opportunity for other parts of the world to also learn from us, despite the fact that we are also the primary victims.
Oh, thank you so much. We are supposed to have been joined by two gentlemen, and for some challenges, we were unable to have introduced them much earlier, but it seems one of them is right now here with us, joining us via Zoom, and that is Group Captain Sadiq Garba Shehu, retired. Group Captain Sadiq Garba Shehu is a security and defense consultant and an expert in self-school declaration. You're welcome, Group Captain.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's move on with you before we let go again. Give us your overview or what you're able to make out of this three-day conference that was held in Nigeria, talking about self-school declaration.
Well, picking Nigeria to host this conference, the fourth ever, is as a result of the political commitment that Nigeria has shown since the self-school declaration was launched. It is on record that Nigeria was among the first 15 countries to sign up to the self-school declaration. And that's on the positive side. On the negative side, right now we stand as one of the countries with the worst figures of attacks on schools and the kidnapping of school children. So evidently, the international community would like to host the meeting in a country that will bring a lot of attention. Now, having said that, the purpose of such conferences, like the PAMSEC has said, is to share ideas. School attack did not start in Nigeria. It took somewhere maybe in Iraq with people that have grouse with children going to school, and many other countries. If you check the literature, you'll see other countries that have similar problems that we have. So when you have such an international forum, it is an opportunity for all the countries to bring what they tried and for other countries to see what could work and what could not work. When we say global best practices or international best practices, there is tendency for people to exclude Nigeria. But Nigeria as a country also is part of the international community. And I'm sure, even though unfortunately I didn't attend this event, but I have been part and parcel of many engagements concerning the school self-declaration project. Definitely in Nigeria also, there are good practices that Nigeria can share. And this has been captured in many literature. For example, when after the Chibok and the attack in the Northeast, Nigeria introduced the concept of alternative places for education. Some schools were transferred out of security challenge institutions. Of course, there are some logistic problems, but all the same, it is one of the good concepts that are introduced to move schools, because the idea behind safe school is that education is so important that no matter the level of insecurity, no matter the level of conflict, every effort should be made to ensure that children continue going to school. So it is for looking at not stopping education, but somehow finding ways to continue education. So this alternative school program, which was practiced in the Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states, was a good global best practice that has entered into the channel. Another global best practice that Nigeria has introduced, in as much as you want security in schools, again, there are psychologists, child psychology experts who believe that if children are seeing soldiers holding guns in school, that will add to the trauma that one of the guests here have spoken about. So what did Nigeria do? Between a collaboration with UN agencies other NGOs that form the Education in Emergency Working Group, and also with collaboration between Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Education. A collaboration was found where, as much as possible, the presence of armed military personnel is reduced. How do we do? While soldiers will be there to provide schools, to provide some teaching or to provide security, a sort of working arrangement was worked where soldiers will minimize carrying their weapons into the school compound by respecting a certain distance, by respecting certain place where they will keep their, it's a balancing distance. Again, this is another global best practice which Nigeria has contributed to. So by and by, going ahead again, like the PAMSEC said, meetings, conferences are good. But what is more important is carrying forward. I am appealing to all the stakeholders, federal government, state government, private school owners, local government, NGOs that have been trying, and UN agencies, global coalition. Please, we should not go to sleep after this conference. We should put concrete measures to ensure that these things are carried forward. That is what I have to say. Thank you.
All right. Group Captain Sadiq, thank you very much there for your contribution. Of course, we'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Now back to the studios, Mrs. Judith Giwamo, tell us, what was the experience for you at the just concluded conference?
One of the key things we look at in education is child participation. We had a very good outing of children. We heard their voices. They told us how we had the Borno State Children's Parliament. They had their speaker, they had their honorables, and these children were speaking, and they spoke so confidently. They talked about the impact of attacks on their school. They talked about how they want those that have committed to take measures to implement the Safe School Declaration by making sure that we are able to provide safe learning environment for them. They told us how they feel safe, the impact, on them in terms of the psychological trauma. So hearing their voices, they had their own manifesto and they presented it to the world at the end. So that was nice. And then having an aggregation, looking at it, Safe School Declaration from the legal side as to what is being done to investigate issues of attack, what is being done to prosecute and to reparate, what is being done for victims. Is there anything that is being done? Do we have a robust system? So this was part of what came out, that we need to have a robust reintegration system whereby there can be some kind of rehabilitation of those that have, been affected, those that have been abducted, and those that have probably gone through maybe sexual gender-based violence and all that, so that they can be able to be, healed and face the education system again. So from the legal aspect, what are the laws? How the laws need to, that whole process needs to be followed right down to the end. Then looking at the continuity of education, that was one of the best practices, like he shared, that was shared. We actually got the Cameroonian experience. The Minister of Secondary Education, she talked about, Nigerians, the influx into Cameroon, and how they had to, establish camps, and how they had to utilize one of the alternative forms of education during, as an inheritance or something that came out from the COVID, and how that was used to actually increase or improve education indices. She actually mentioned data on improvements comparing 2019 to 2020 and how that can be used. But she emphasized the need for financing, public financing for education. What are we doing about it? She mentioned the President Biya and how support had been given because they went into digital education. They needed tablets and things like that. But on the overall, she emphasized that a lot of improvement has been made using this form of education. So that could be an alternative, because the Safe School Declaration is talking about school continuity. Even in times of conflict, we don't want schools to stop.
I was just going to say, if you remember some of the things the children said about what their experiences were. Yeah. Part of my own fleeting experience is too remote now to dredge up. But I do recall that just at the onset of the Civil War, the military, after the secessionists had invaded the old Midwest, and Murtala Muhammad led the troops that flushed them out, the forces occupied St. James's Anglican School. That's smack in the middle of Benin City. And we used to go around, of course, schools were closed, and we used to go around to play. But it created some impact because after they left, we then started playing war games, using catapult and other things, you know. But what did they tell you about their experiences in being displaced from their schools?
So that psychologically, for them to return to the schools, that fear, that vision of the last time they were there, and then sometimes the school, like the Education Emergencies Working Group, one of the things we have done is to develop what you call tools to look at attacks and look at even including tools to say before return back to school. You cannot expect children to return back to school where the evidence of what happened is there. You know, so there should be a way that before they return back to school, the environment is made more attractive. A safe school is a school that a child looks forward to going to. So when you see a child saying, I don't want to go to school, and keeps on saying, there's something. So if that school environment is attractive, we look at, you know, psychosocial support, which is psychological healing, ways to do that so that the child, like you said, those experiences, you might not be able to totally wipe them out. And indeed, some children, depending on how severely they've been affected, they may need to be referred to specialists.
Okay, thank you so much, Judith Giamu. Pamsek, just like who are recollecting, most of us who are just part of this history, thinking about maybe when the war ended, and then soldiers were, you know, dispersed back to barracks, why there were barracks and why there were no barracks. Of course, the ultimate place to go was the school.
That's right.
I remember in our school then, there's a Mubi 2 primary school in Mubi. We've been asked to really leave the school. I remember I was in primary 2 then. We were asked to leave the school, and of course, we were marched to another school far away. By the time we came back to our former school, we found the school more or less like not the way it was as we left it, given the fact that some people were here. The second point I want to make is the fact that then, when you see the military man, you see him as somebody who's from another world. He is not part of the civil society. He's supposed to be somewhere in the barracks exclusive. But now here we are intermingling with them and having them all over the places, and we can now know why the reasons are there. And if we can look into this conference, it's more or less like a peer review conference. And Nigeria being very central in this, given the fact that the insurgency has forced a lot of children out of school, coupled or complicated by the COVID-19. At the international and then the sub-national level, how was the peer review? Talking about what we got from the Northeast, all right? And of course, what is happening in the Northwest, which may not be exactly what the Northeast is practicing. And looking at Chad, Cameroon, and Niger too, as having their own issues. How did it play out?
Actually, it was an interesting find, you know. Excuse me. From the excuse me. From
Sorry,
the
you need some water?
Conversations we had, yeah.
Yeah, please.
And for most countries, the focus was on what did you do? And for Nigeria, 3 things happened by way of lessons. First, conflicts always happen ahead of military deployments, which means when these kidnappings or attacks on schools happen, sometimes the military are not deployed in those locations. And in trying to repel such attacks or to protect the community, the military will necessarily need to make arrangements, have a base where you can mobilize your equipment and forces before you plan your activities. And yes, in the past, schools were the most logical area. Most communities don't even have too many public spaces. So they use schools. But this declaration is saying that you should look for other spaces, other than schools, because schools are areas where you are going to have to bring children who are impressionable and who, as we said, need to continue education even in times of conflict. Because we want that continuity, we also encourage that spaces other than schools should be used for such. The other aspect is that we felt that, and we were able to share this, we are proud to report that a lot of countries actually look up to Nigeria in terms of the ways we've been able to, in our own way, manage situations. For example, we did develop alternative curricula, accelerated curricula for kids who have dropped out of school, given the length of time it has taken to control this insurgency. And these accelerated programs help kids catch up when they drop out and they have to come back. We've also taken education. We have what we call alternative schools program. We've taken education to IDP camps. And while all of this is happening, we are still able to teach them, provide some level of support, and also encourage them to even take their attention from the facts of what the conditions that they are facing, and be able to learn and acquire knowledge and skills that will become useful in the years ahead. We were able to do that. And we are also happy with the level of commitment our government has shown at various stages of trying to support education, trying to improve the welfare of teachers, trying to increase funding for education, which is very important at times of conflict. We did emphasize that in the communique. And finally, also, some of the measures we took in response to COVID that are also applicable in terms of ensuring that school continues even at times of conflict. For example, adopting technology, being able to broadcast content. Again, we thank NTA, FRC, and all the other media that helped us to partner to be able to broadcast content for our exit classes and for other schools. Also leveraging on technology, having devices in our schools, transforming the mode of pedagogy, how our schools are organized, how teaching and learning is undertaken in our schools. These are some of the things we were able to share with our compatriots. Now back to the question about what is happening in the other parts of our sub-region. Again, because increasingly in Mali, in Niger, in Chad, and also in Cameroon, we've had similar experiences. Sometimes also the forces against us are very mobile. They move from one part of the region to the other. And a concerted approach, an integrated approach of trying to monitor, to share intelligence, share information, and also have joint operations have been very effective in trying to limit the impact of this. And we hope that as we are also partnering at various organizations in which we belong and also working on similar strategies, we'll be able to address the challenge of ensuring that schools are safe. Also, finally, the issue about the other impacts, because safety of schools is not only limited to military or insurgency. There are other impacts about safety. Issues that my colleague talked about earlier, things like sexual violence, for example, and the linkages that these have, issues about molestation, bullying, drug addiction, and so are all consequences. In fact, the biggest consequence is the fact that when schools are attacked, the tendency is that the boys go through all forms of indoctrination, mind-bending, and they even do get recruited over time to become parts of the insurgents or part of those who have attacked them. While the women are taken into forced marriages, in some cases you have all sorts of rape, and you see even when we recover these children, some are carrying children, and all of that, because of all the trauma and all the things, the experience that they have.
Okay, thank you, Architect Chono. We'll come back to you. Now, back to Group Captain Sadiq. Group Captain Sadiq, tell us, let's have a clearer understanding. We know that at least in the northeast of Nigeria, the country has been at war with insurgents. So that's war, defined in clear terms. But what we do have in some other parts of the country, say in the northwest, and lately now in the southeast, but mostly in the northwest and parts of the north central, you are having non-state actors who are acting as bandits and kidnappers and so on and so forth, and still making school environment pretty unsafe. Will the same guidelines apply to what happened in the Northeast, where you had, as I said, full-scale war against insurgents versus kidnappers who are operating to collect ransom and then undertake other forms of criminality?
Thank you very much. Yes, we have different kinds of threats against education. So arising from the subsequent declaration, there is a group called the Global Coalition for the Protection of Education Against Attack. In the guidelines they formulated, they classified attacks against education into 6 or 8. I really cannot remember. Either also or 6 or 8 acts have been identified as attacks against education. This group of acts could move from directly attacking the school, or attacking teachers, or attacking students, or attacking.
The freeze there of the Zoom connection by group cat.
That also counts as attack. Hello, are you hearing me?
All right, we are hearing you now. We lost you momentarily.
Okay, so the Global Coalition for the Protection of Attack Against Education has classified 6 to 8 acts that could count as attack. Some of them are direct attacks on the school premises, students, teachers, or school infrastructure. Some other things that could be considered as attack: kidnapping of students for ransom or for whatever purpose. Some other form of attack could be even using the school for a security purpose, maybe as a military depot, as a police depot, or as a place for armory. I go back to the the discussion before you called me in. Use of schools by security forces or police has become normal. However, what this what these guidelines are telling security forces, be they military or police, is that in as much as recognizing that sometimes police or army will enter into a school, like the PAM said, to be near to the place where they are transferred operation. What the guidelines are saying is that at the back of the mind of the military or police commander, he should always ask, is there an alternative place apart from school where I could put my men, where I could put my ammunition? If there is an alternative place, it should not be a default mechanism that you go to school. You should look for that alternative. That is, but what I'm saying, it has taken cognizance of the practicality. Sometimes occupying the school is as a result of practicality. Now, if it is practicality, there is not any alternative method. What the police or the military are expected to do when they are leaving the school, wherever military or security force stay, there is possibility of leaving unexploded ordnances. There is a possibility, if depending on how they live, if there was an attack on the place, they could leave some rifles or some grenades. They are to make sure that before leaving that place, they clear of all these incidences. And again, back to using alternative school method, taking us back to history, as early as during the Civil War, because I heard you mentioning the Civil War, it is important to note that the issue of protection of schools was an issue even during the Civil War. There is this school, one of the federal government colleges, called Federal Government Eposi. I think it should be in I don't know, it's one of the southeastern states now. It was, started in 1965. But 1967, federal forces converted that school as an armory or as a depot. And the students have to be evacuated and shared between Federal Government College Ori and Federal Government College Sokoto, my alma mater. So what I want to say, the issue of education, protecting education against attack is a global concept that should be embraced by all countries. The idea, like one of the guests said, is to ensure education is so important. The future of children is so important that everything should be done possible, even where conflict is ongoing. As much as all efforts should be geared towards ensuring that there's no break in the education of the children by using the different methods. So different attacks, whether by bandits, whether by Boko Haram, whether even use of the schools by our own Nigerian police or Nigerian forces, are among some of the activities that have been defined as attacks against education, in quotation, attacks against education. So all these 6 categories, military and security forces, are enjoined to avoid them. Of course, some of them, like I said, is as a result of reality. If you are passing through Kaduna, around this Fulani town, there is one, because that is my road, There is this primary school just by the roadside. You always see police there. Now, I agree it's for the police to be nearer to the bandit. But like I said, the teaching is that a military commander, a police commander should consider, must it be the school or I have an alternative? Now, another global best practice I want to talk about is that about a week ago, the Minister of Defense, in collaboration with the working group on attack against education in Nigeria, which is a conglomeration of IGOs, they launched a document, which is a training manual for Nigerian security forces and Nigerian all security agencies, whether police agency. It was launched on that day. Now, the challenge is a very good product. I am proud to say that I took part in, in designing that booklet, but that is not the issue. The issue is that we should try and bring the content of that book into the hands of our policemen, our military men, and our maybe civil defense, whatever, any security agency that involved with providing food or occupying food, they should know what the content is there. Because I will tell you, as a former security man, it may not make sense to a security man, for example, working in a notice, if you tell him why did the commander put his soldiers in a school. But by giving them that, that document, by training them on that, he will understand the reasoning behind. There is easily a trauma. It's not likely that a soldier will understand what trauma is. But if you explain to him what we are trying to avoid is trauma. So please, I want all the stakeholders that are ably represented here, the PAMSEC is here. Let's make sure Ministry of Defense is there. Let them make sure that this document, because we have a tendency of making documents and then leaving them in drawers. Please, we should bring these documents and make sure they are widely populated and circulated. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, Group Captain Sadiq, thanks a lot for your explanation. I was just wondering, the categorization that I tried to make as a preface to my question was that in the Northeast you have a full-scale war against insurgents. But in the Northwest, for instance, that has been mostly impacted by kidnapping and banditry. The targets are mobile, and you don't have the whole idea of occupation. In some cases, the forces come in after the fact, and the victims have been marched off to some remote locations. What can be done in those circumstances, around those schools that are obviously, of course, after such attacks, get deserted by the teachers and then by the students or pupils?
Okay, thank you. Yes, like you said, after the fact, what do we do? There are both early warning systems. There are proactive measures that all actors, beginning from school owners, even PTA, school authority could take to minimize, if not prevent attacks on school, but to minimize their effect. I will just go through some of them. For example, it goes without saying that you need a perimeter fence around the school. Even if it will not stop attack, at least it will delay the attacker. It will also serve as a deterrent. It will take a lot of money to erect, but that is the ideal. Secondly, there is awareness of the community. Earlier on, one of the guests talked about security. If I recall the attack on Ankara, experience has shown before any mass abduction, there is definitely going to be a reconnaissance. The group is not just going to come into the school. They must have come a day or 2 days before. If these communities around the school, if the local may guard in the school, who may not be well trained, but if it's told to look, pay particular attention to somebody passing several times in front of the school or asking questions around, sensitizing the people, he might be able to pass an information that will stop an attack on school. Another something that could be done is that schools should be required, and here again, with due respect, the PAMSEC education is there, even at state level. It is state government and federal government that award, that give permission for setting up schools or for renewal of continuation. It should, for example, be a requirement that for every school, you must have a basic security plan. Security plan should involve drills. What happens if there is shot at the gate? The children are notified, and there is a requirement to regularly carry out that drill. I think the state government and the federal governments can do that. This drill will ensure it may not stop the attack per se, but it makes sure that the students, the teachers, the drivers in the cooks, they are not completely helpless when an attack happens. Maybe they could be told when they are firing, the normal, reaction for somebody who's not a military personnel when they are firing is to start running, standing up. You could tell them when you hear this thing, go to the back of a desk or the back of the wall and lie down. These are some small things. Then there should be requirement to also carry out this. So apart from making sure that schools have security distance, there should be a requirement for schools. Now I come to us, what I mean, me and you, as parents of children. How many of us take the time, despite the fact we pay sometimes millions of naira for our children, how many of us take time to say, Mr. Principal, what is the security plan you have? This school attack is becoming a phenomenon. It can happen anywhere. I want to know, what do you have? At least having it. If he doesn't have it, you will take him to task because you are paid, especially those that are paid for private schools. But even for the public schools, the government can do that. Well, for private schools, the PTA, there should be that awareness. So in essence, what I want to say, I agree with you that sometimes we go after the attack. But definitely, if you look at the document that is produced for Nigeria, for the Nigerian security forces, there are things that Ministry of Education should do. There are things that PTA should do. There are things that school owners should do. And this involves both actions to prevent an attack, actions to minimize the effect of an attack, and then actions to do when attack happens. So the idea is, awareness and generating awareness and making laws or requirements, because if you don't put laws, if you don't put it as a requirement, we will finish this conference and then we'll go back to sleep. And I don't want that to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The conference is already over, and I think we're just trying to see how or what the best we can make out of it. Thank you so much, Captain Sadiq. Before we get down to you, Judah, let me throw this to the PAMSEC here. Already Sadiq has mentioned some of them, and that is trying to secure the school and make it, attractive for students to really be going there to learn. I remember in the past, in the 70s and 80s, Kingsley, in schools, there were these, retired servicemen, they were employed in schools.
That's right.
Now we call them zombie or whatever. Then, as the name goes, in various schools, either one or two, that check and then enforce discipline, and of course, try to save the school. Secure the school. Things were okay then. The ground was very level, and there was no much problem. Today, here are big challenges. We don't even see this, handful of retired servicemen in schools anymore. And there are so many of them out there. The problem is we don't really utilize our retired professionals or servicemen or whatever, all spheres of life in Nigeria. But this is paramount and very much, critical in the sense that these ex-servicemen could be used in trying to, get back, make the schools much more safer. I don't know whether the conference looked at that or is the ministry trying to contemplate doing that, especially in the Northeast and the Northwest.
Actually, this is part of our response to the security challenges. And I'm glad a lot of the things he mentioned are actually already being implemented and adopted. There is a presidential committee on security that has a subcommittee on school safety. And I was privileged to serve on that. And we've done a whole lot of work. We have done a risk assessment of all our schools, both federal, state, privately owned, faith-based organizations across the country, in partnership with the defense intelligence, with civil defense, and all the other people involved in the security apparatus. And what we did was to classify them in terms of the level of risk. Some schools are in such remote locations that they are prone. Some are based on the nature of, besides location, also the structure of the environment in which they are considered high risk, some medium risk, and some relatively low. And we have designed a 3-layer security architecture for those schools. The first starting from the level of the schools themselves. And these are some of the issues he talked about. That within the schools, we should have some basic preparation of the students. In the event of attack, what do? You don't gather and make yourself easy for large numbers to be abducted. what even a typical child. And we are introducing clubs now that are actually protecting children. If you see in so many other countries, if you want to kidnap a child, the child can actually give you so much difficulty that you won't be able to take more than one or two, and you now, of course, it will delay and so on. Then we have an effective communication. This is the most important element. When you get these early warnings, when you hear something or you dictate something, who do you talk to? How do you transfer this to the school authorities? How do you now get it to the security authorities? So we have a rapid response team comprising the major security agencies, the military at the top. We have civil defense, we have the police. We even have local vigilantes, and that is where some of our ex-servicemen operate. So every school has what we call a school-based management committee with a security subcommittee. And these are the people that appoint those with numbers that are shared across the security chain to ensure that if all information gets to them, and they can now pass it on to those who can respond. And generally, across the country, depending on the degree of severity in terms of risk, we've put together rapid response teams that will involve the Air Force, the Army, depending on the degree of severity. And that is going to be implemented. In fact, we just submitted our recommendations to government about 2 weeks ago. So that's one challenge. The other is the fact that currently there is some bit of confusion about who takes responsibility. States and local governments are really those at the grassroots. But the weapons or the instruments for them to repel such or to if you like, respond to these challenges are federal. Because even the police is a federal force, the civil defense is a federal force. So we need to do something.
And I'm sure the committee that you sat on was also federal.
Well, absolutely, although we also had representations, but yes. So in terms of command and control, we need to do something about a security architecture that if an information is available to either the governor or to even the commissioner, for example, at the school, who does he relate to and how does he activate these response teams to rest? Because time is of essence in most of these cases. But all said and done, what we need to do as a country is to take the battle to all these bandits and where they are. We don't need to wait until they come to our school before we start playing defense. And that is why we are very pleased with the measures that have been taken. We are in the loop, so we know what is happening, particularly in the Northwest now. And a lot of success was recorded in Zamfara. We are seeing how this is also playing out now in Kaduna. And we see a lot of things going to happen in a few other stories. There are security issues. I can't talk about details. But essentially, government is addressing this issue headlong. And we also got some commendation from our foreign partners at this conference who are monitoring. The ambassadors are all here. We had more than at least close to 40, 50 ambassadors in attendance at the conference. And they see all these things happen, they file reports. So they gave credence to the fact that there has been renewed vigor in our fight against this. And we are very hopeful and optimistic that the results will come.
Thank you very much. The aspect, I think you've touched on it briefly, but a principal concern for us, often on Good Morning Nigeria, and my colleague Nadabo will testify to this, is implementation challenge. Sometimes at the federal level, but mostly at the subnational level, where they don't have that buy-in. That's why I was asking, by way of interjection, whether the committee was federal in nature. And he said yes. So by the time it is to be cascaded down, what happens? It might be slow reaction or response or acceptance at the subnational level. What can be done to rapidly percolate the ideas or guidelines to the subnational entities at the state level, at the national, at the local government level, at the community level, so that everybody, is energized about the new ideas and the new propositions?
Yes, security is a shared responsibility. But I agree with you that each time we get to this point, what you get to hear are varying degrees of commitment, either because of the leadership, because you need the governors and even the local government chairman to be interested and willing to make the right sacrifices. there is usually the challenge of finance. Everybody talks about it. Who funds because these are emergent issues. They are not things you plan for. And when they occur, how much resources are available and what is the level of commitment to deploy those resources for these purposes. We have various organs where we relate to the various tiers of government and even all the branches of the government. But the reality is that we still need to there is a national consciousness that we need, not in terms of blame game alone, but in also taking concrete measures. More often than not, these people live amongst us. We know who are miscreants or who do not have any means of livelihood that are known to people within our communities. When strange people appear, we get to know. So by the time we all as a people decide that it is not only the kinetic responses that the military do, but also the society itself, the values that we create, and the bigger issues that we need to address in this country. Issues about poverty, issues about expanding opportunities for a large number of our people to be able to partake in the economy so that they are not ready hands for enlistment, for recruitment, for doing this. Creating hope in the populace so that we can all begin to work towards a united country. We also have to have a love for our country, patriotism. We also need to have a situation where we all feel a sense of belonging, a stake in the national endeavor. Then some of these things will begin to reduce.
Okay, thank you so much, Architect Sony. We will take a break now, and the discussion will continue after the break. And I promise you, when we come back, we'll try to look at this implementation issue as being put forward by my colleague here. It's always been the bane here, and then trying to see how we'll be able to really make some positive actions out of the Safe Schools Declaration Conference that just ended. It's Good Morning Nigeria. Stay with us.
You're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We still have our three guests with us. Group Captain Sadiq via Zoom, and Mrs. Judith Gewa of UNICEF React here in the studios, and Architect Sonny Echono, PAMSEC, Federal Ministry of Education, also here in the studios. I know we've been talking essentially about the fiscal aspects, fiscal security aspects around the Safe Schools Declaration. But earlier on in the conversation, mention was made of some of the conclusions and recommendations out of the fourth conference relating to justice. Justice for the state, justice for the victims, and therefore punishment for the perpetrators. There are also the other aspect you mentioned in passing, which also has to do with the trauma suffered by victims of gender-based violence and how to rehab them and so on and so forth. How positioned are we to take off and ensure that these recommendations now form part of our script in dealing with issues of lack of safety around schools and, in fact, implementing the Safe Schools Declaration?
Well, child protection is very critical. And during the conference, the Ministry of Women Affairs, they are very strong partners in the area of child protection. So under child protection, there are counselors who are trained to deal with trauma, who are available to be deployed as needed. And indeed, in the implementation of Safe School Declaration, what is being done to survivors of attack, that is where the role of child protection comes in. Because depending on how these children are, are cared for and are addressed, how the issue is addressed, it will determine whether that child drops out totally out of the education mainstream or decides to take, the bull by the horns. We actually had, on the first day, Monday, we had one of the Chibok girls. And this thing tells you that any child can do well anywhere. The way, the confidence, she actually recounted her story. She was one of those that had the boldness to, she recounted how they came in military and uniform, and initially they said, we've come to help you. And they followed them. But they said, as the time went on, they saw them gathering food stuff, then setting the hostel ablaze. So they got into the trucks. But they said one vehicle, broke down. And she said she ran. She's now in America. If she's speaking, you not even know she's a Nigerian. So that tells you what can happen depending on how you treat that child. Whether the child will decide to go down this way and go down this way. And these children are our future. Illiteracy will promote more and more of this kind of, negative coping capacity mechanisms, abduction, mingling with crime generally. So that aspect is a very critical one, the psychosocial aspect. Then
are we fully capacitated for this, or do we also need to expand in terms of our personnel, in terms of our resources, and in terms of deployment?
We need to expand. One of the things I want to mention from UNICEF's perspective that we're doing is that in recognition of the position and the role of the school-based management committees, they are in the community, they have a role to play in the schools. They are actually being trained in psychosocial support delivery, so that at that level, the child, because they know the children in the community, they can do, encouragement visits, they can actually deal with this child, and they can actually say, no, this child needs a more specialized attention. So I think we are at the stage whereby we need to put all this in place, training the SBMC, training teachers to be able to look in their class and say, oh, this child is so withdrawn, and this child was affected. Oh, they need specialized care. Or using, even sports, music. Those are also therapeutical. Sports has been identified as one of the most therapeutic ways of reintegrating children in terms of, trauma reduction. So teachers also have a role to play. Community members have a role to play. At the health levels, primary health facility, there's a role to play. Depending on who gets referred to what, social welfare services, there's a role to play.
And local governments,
truly local governments and indeed the communities.
You just talked about therapies now, sports. How many local governments are organizing sporting competitions? How many local governments are building sports facilities? Just from a playground, and so on and so forth. How many of them?
Kingsley, just look back. Or you remember in the schools then, 70s and 80s, the inter-schools competition, of course, while you move on, you take that gongo or that big vehicle, that iron vehicle, 911, and then you crisscross the state, and that enhances, this thing. But all the same, Group Captain Sadiq, let's look at the relevance of data in this conference, and then see how much we'll be able to get out of that. Data plays a very crucial role in trying to promote or facilitate the implementation of all the plans we have. Data here we may referring to how many schools are unsafe. Data here referring to how many schools have, perimeter fences and how many need. Of course, talking about the security men in the schools, how many are there, how many are supposed to be gotten. Now, what's the takeaway from this conference, talking about data and, of course, how it can be implemented?
Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely, data in whatever you are going to do, data helps you to plan. Data gives you trend. Data allows you to predict something that is about to happen. We are not, unfortunately, as a country, we are not good at keeping data, but it is very important if we are going to secure our schools. Like you said, there should have been a survey. Let me apologize to National Security and Civil Defense Corps. I was at an event that was organized by the Ministry of Finance, and the Commandant General of NSCDC was there. He told that gathering that they have done a security survey of all the schools in Nigeria and identified those that need additional security protection. I do not know where that survey has gone, but that is one good example of keeping a data. Now, let's even come to most basic data. As a security consultant who is also involved with such project, there is one common theme that comes whenever a school is attacked, which I am never happy with. And what is that? A school will be attacked. When the story hits the headline, of course, the persons you ask are the school authority. Is it headmaster or is it principal? But in many cases, unfortunately, you find that as of the time of the attack, the school does not even know exactly how many students were in the school before the attack. In security management, there is something we do. If, for example, we do this training, we provide this training, like, for example, we did training on fire drill at the Federal Secretariat last year, the first thing you do, because to help the first responders, is to know how many people are missing. If possible, where are they located in the building, if it is high distance. Unfortunately, whenever we have attack of school, whether it is Kankara, whether it is even the latest in Yelwaya Wuri, I had 2 days ago, whether commissioner or the principal saying the truth is that they do not know the number of students that were taken. You cannot know that if, for example, you do not know the number of students you have in the schools. If it is a day school, the number of people that have entered the school premises then. We do not take this seriously. If you go to other climes, whether it is a government building, when anywhere you are entering, as you are entering your plot, they know where you are, and that is the importance of badging and asking people. But we don't do that. So when you don't know the number of students, as basic as that is, sometimes we spend 5 days. I remember the case of Kankara, for over a week, nobody could say with certainty how many students were taken. So you see how data is really, really lacking. And without data, you cannot plan. So please, we should improve. There is tendency to say, all these things, there is no doubt saying, like Pamsek said, it will need a lot of money. If a school does not have perimeter fence, if a school, the classes do not even have windows, they don't have doors, in that somebody could enter and put an explosive, then when you talk of data, you think that is even a luxury. So I think it's this mindset that investing in school security is a waste of time. I will even come to the community level. Most communities, if there is any fight or any political dispute that will be held, they will say, let's go to the primary school. Primary schools have become like no man's land. That is where disputes are going to be settled. It is part of us. Permit me to go back a little again, because you raised one issue I wanted, the legal aspect of it. Again, 2-3 days ago, I think I heard that Sarah has lodged a complaint with ICC that they want ICC to come and investigate the advent of school attacks and the abduction of children. Well, I will not say whether Sarah has that or not. But as a Nigerian security consultant, I think we do not have to wait for ICC to come and make special legislation or special law for people that endanger our most prized assets, that is our children. There should be specific law. What does punishment do? It serves as a deterrence. It removes that feeling of impunity that I can do it. They're one of the major bandits that did Kankara. I am not happy to see him after 2-3 days coming to grant interview that he has repented and all that. It was then later again, the same man said that he is no longer repenting, he's going back into the bush. I think he's making a mockery of us. There should be this, and we should know it for ICC. Whenever you hear ICC, whether it is human rights against our security, or now that Serap has called them to come and investigate this thing, ICC is a complementary mechanism. Wherever ICC intervenes, it means the country where it has intervened has demonstrated its unwilling, that is the term, unwilling or unable. I do not think Nigeria is unable to act. I don't think Nigeria is unwilling to act because we have the capacity. So we shouldn't wait for ICC to come and be investigating such mundane things for us. We should be able to have our own capacity for investigation, for punishment, and all the processes in place. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Group Captain Sadiq, and also for speaking to the issue of justice. Justice for the state, justice for the victims, very important. The PAMSEC is still here, is going to speak to that. But there's a point you made about risk assessment report that was prepared by Civil Defense, and the PAMSEC also indicated that the committee has just done its work. Well, it is not for excuse me, it's not for us to discuss the details. The questions that would arise will be as follows. Where are those reports? Have state governments been obliged with copies of those reports? I'll give you an example. We know that every year, NIMET has its rainfall predictions. And on account of the devastation we have suffered from unpredictable, changing weather patterns, climatic patterns and flooding, states are usually obliged with these reports. Some of them pick it up and then act. Others, of course, continue to sit on their arms. But for the issue of security, every state has a security council. So have they received this report? Have they summoned all the required resources and so on and so forth to implement? Local governments are also supposed to have their own security councils instead of them to be hanging around the governor's office. Have they also received this report and are they acting on it? These are some of the questions that remain pertinent. But on the issue of justice for the state and justice for the victims, Permanent Secretary, look, everybody will get to hear of reports about the prosecution of corruption cases because it's a cardinal objective of the administration. But little is heard about the prosecution of bandits and kidnappers. Even though these are, you would argue, some persons would argue, these are state offenses, we appear to be a bit lukewarm, talking about the politics around amnesty and self-admonition and so on and so forth. Isn't this giving encouragement to the attackers to continue to run wild?
Absolutely. Indeed, this was one of the areas where we didn't score too high in terms of our peer review during the conference. Because as a country, there's a shared acceptance that for us to address our security challenges, we must approach it from the point of deterrence and consequence. You must punish people who carry out acts against the state, who perpetrate violence, who kidnap people. And being able to track, being able to follow them, even if ransom is paid. The purpose of ransom is to secure the release of victims. Thereafter, we must follow these people, our security agencies must follow these people to a logical end. And we, as a people, cannot afford to be in a hurry to grant amnesty to people who are still actively involved in carrying out operations and doing things. No, things like that come in much later when peace, normalcy has been restored, and peace, and people are now talking about integration and so on and so forth. So yes, we have not done too well in that area. There is a lot that we can do and we need to improve. We need to reinforce the deterrent aspect, that once you carry out the government, the security agencies will follow you to the logical end wherever you go, and whenever they find you, they will bring you to justice, or they will take justice to you wherever you are. And once we're able to do that, it now begins to deter people if they know they cannot get away with it. If they know that even the proceeds that they get from the payments, they will not be able to enjoy it, because ultimately they will be caught and they will be made to pay. This is one area that we need to do, and our justice system must respond in a more nimble manner than we are doing currently.
All right, thank you. Then back to Judith. The aspect around counseling for gender-based violence. I know that even the IDP camps, there have been reports about violations in those environments. But is it a subject matter that we can put on the table and continue to take a look at it and be sure that we are turning the page on issues around counseling for victims of gender-based violence and the trauma that kidnapped victims do suffer, and of course for pupils who have been displaced from their schools?
I think it's a very important subject that can be put on the table, because that is double attack. A child that has been violated has already expired an IDP, so that child is already vulnerable. And then the system that is supposed to be looking at the rights of the child to living in a conducive environment, that same system is also introducing a source of violence. It's something that needs to be. And perpetrators, I know there's been a lot of public, even international awareness about, even in the camps, not only in Nigeria, how the rights of females have been, the rights of females have been violated through sexual gender-based violence and punishment. Even sometimes the peacekeepers are the responsible people. Yeah. So it's very critical. It is very, very critical. It stays on the table, it's a burner, because even the Safe School Declaration, beyond talking of conflict, it's also looking at violence as a key hazard. I know for violence, we're talking of physical, gender, psychological, health, and all that.
Well, thank you so much, Judith. We are really pressed for time now, and of course, Group Captain Sadiq, maybe in 60 seconds, so what would you advise especially at the subnational level, towards the implementation of recommendations of this schools declaration?
Well, in short, what I would say first, like I said earlier, Nigeria has shown political commitment by being one of the first countries, to sign up to the SSD. But beyond SSD, again, like other guests, like the PAMSEC has said, there are many moving parts in this our Chase for Safe School Declaration project. There are actions being done at the federal government level by several ministries. There are states that are doing their own. There are private schools that are doing.
Shit. It looks like a freeze there.
Yeah, it
Unfortunately,
is, yes.
I was just wondering, very quickly, PAMSEC. Now we talked about what we are doing in terms of alternative curricula and also alternative pedagogy, which is teaching. These are new things. Have we been able to evaluate the outcomes and therefore see whether there might be a necessity for tweaking what we have already unleashed?
Frankly, yes. The alternative or accelerated curricula that we developed was piloted in a number of states, starting with Borno, and we've had very good results. That's clear. Also, just as been said, there are new innovations that are being created. We are now, for example, as part of the outcome of this conference, recommending that in any military operation, whether peacekeeping or in actual conflict, repelling conflict, that we now have embeds, just like the way you embed journalists to cover, of people who we call child protection advisors, so that even regular forces are cognizant that they are being watched in what happens in areas of operation. So you don't go there and you're acting like army of occupation, violating the rights of women and all sorts of, and children and so on.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm just trying to let that prompt you to round up because you're really pressed for time.
I understand that. But a major outcome of this is actually the commitment that all around the world, there is a commitment, a growing commitment to taking practical steps for action to ensure that A, we minimize conflict, and B, we ensure that our schools are safe for the children, for teaching, learning, and research to take place, and to produce the future citizens that will help to transform our world and make it peaceful and prosperous for all of us.
Thank you so very much, Permanent Secretary, Federal Minister of Education, Architect Sonny Ichon. It's a pleasure being part of Good Morning this morning.
Pleasure is mine.
Some also appreciation goes to Judith Giwa-Amu, the Education Officer, UNICEF, and Education in Emergencies Working Group National Coordinator. It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
Group Captain Sadiq Garuba Shehu, retired security expert and defense consultant and expert in Safe School Declaration. We thank you so much for being part of us this morning. And on that note, we thank you so much for being part of this program, but we can't let you go without having a bit of sports.